Okay, welcome, Arthur Goldstuck. I'm super happy to have you here join us. You're the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to AI, which is amazing. I really like the name, so I assume it comes from the book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, some inspiration on that side. Would I be fair to say that?
Definitely, but it actually goes back to my first 9 years ago, which was called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Internet. And that was inspired by The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But ironically, the title of the new one is far more appropriate because one of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books was called Don't Panic. And that's really the underlying theme of my book now, because people are panicking about AI. They never did about the internet, but they are now. And I'm trying to tell them, don't panic.
It's okay. So maybe let's start with a little bit about your background. So maybe if you can just tell our audience a little bit about you, what you're passionate about, how did you get into all of this, just so we understand a bit more.
My background is as a journalist. I always wanted to be a writer and a journalist, and I had a few passion areas, one being music. I was a music journalist for many years, and I was South African correspondent for Billboard magazine throughout the 1990s. And the other was technology, and that came through having a passion for science fiction. And I always imagined a future where the visions in science fiction novels would become real. And the internet was really the beginning of that becoming real. But AI truly brings it into science fiction focus for me. And to me, now I'm living those science fiction visions.
Makes a lot of sense because if you look at movies and things like that, you can almost see the progression. It's almost science got inspiration from the stories that were being told. It feels like that sometimes, right? So you mentioned a bit of your background, particularly which technology were you looking at? How did you get involved? What research did you do? How did AI start for you? How did that all happen?
It probably goes back to when I started a computer supplement for the Weekly Mail, as it was then called, now the Mail and Guardian. And that was called PC Review. It was in conjunction with the editor of Weekly Mail, Erwin Minoyam. We really started PC Review together, myself as assistant editor to him being editor, and eventually I took over as editor of PC Review. But we were constantly looking for the cutting edge. We were trying to make technology accessible to ordinary readers, but also to tell them where it was going. And when the internet came along, I took to it instantly. And it was like a natural environment for me, particularly because of that science fiction background. One of my favorite novels of all time was Neuromancer, Neuromancer by William Gibson. And that's coined the phrase cyberspace, but it also presaged a future where brains would be plugged into this global network, which was very similar to what the internet became, except brains weren't plugged in. But in terms of cyberspace, that was the internet. So I was waiting for it. And when it arrived, I leaped in, boots and all, gloves and all, I suppose you could say. And when it became commercial, when browsers first emerged, I'd already been using it for a while. And in PC Review, we became the first mainstream publication to cover the internet in South Africa. And I remember it was April 1994, when we ran a big supplement within PC Review about this thing called the internet. And for most people reading that, it was their first exposure ever. And a lot of people still to this day cite that as the moment they woke up to it. And within that supplement, I also wrote an article about how the internet wrote my book, which was one of my urban legends books. At that stage, I had written 3 urban legends books. And the third one was about the urban legends of the South African elections in 1994. And the result of that article about using the internet to write my book was that I was interviewed by the Sunday Times. A journalist by the name of Greg Gordon wrote an article about how the internet wrote a book, because at that time it was a very novel idea that you could use the internet to help you write a book. Bearing in mind that unlike AI, which can write a book for you,
Yeah.
What I meant then was that I used it to research the
Mm.
information in my book, or rather search for the information. And a publisher saw that article and asked me to write a guide to the internet. And that became the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Internet. And that in turn resulted in a flood of demand for consulting and research services. And I decided to start a research company, which was called Media Africa. And it was in partnership with two other people who were active in peripheral areas related to that. One was Herman Manson, who today publishes a media publication online called Media Toolbox. But he was one of the first to publish a media magazine on the internet. And Kathy Stadler, who went on to become marketing manager of Oracle for Africa. We were a tight little team. We hadn't actually all met at the time we started our company. Herman had never met us until a long time afterwards. As I said at the time, it was a very internet-y thing to do, to start a business with people you've never met. Today, I guess that is very normal, but back then it was seen as brave and silly. But it was cool and it worked for us. And we were the first in Africa, actually, to conduct research about the size of the internet user base and how it was being used. So that was the beginning of conducting research about the internet, not just on the internet. And we became acquired by, or we became part of a consortium that listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is called a QRT. And it was a consortium of 10 companies, of which we were the smallest. And it was quite a disaster. And 2 years later, I left to form Worldwide Works to pursue my own vision, because the CEO of that company called me in for a meeting where he said, and these are some of my favorite words of my career, he said, "This thing you are doing is passé." And I said, "What thing that I'm doing?" I thought, what is he talking about? Because I was doing a lot of stuff around the internet. He said, "This internet thing." And I thought, oh, wow, he doesn't get it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
by the end of the day, I'd negotiated my departure from the consortium, leaving behind the brand Media Africa, but taking with me Gadget Magazine, which we had established as part of Media Africa from the beginning. It was the first online consumer tech magazine in South Africa, in Africa, in fact. And it still survives to this day as part of Worldwide Works. And it's a very important part of our positioning, but also of being able to keep up with technology on the consumer side, but also on the business side.
Mm.
So that was 2001. And it was around about the time the dot-com crash. And I think that's why the guy thought that the internet was passé. But the reality of it was that the internet was becoming part of the background of everything everyone did in business. So it was becoming more important than ever. It's just that stupid internet business models were collapsing. And that led to the dot-com crash. From then on, Worldwide Works built up steadily over the years. But part of my vision for Worldwide Works was that I didn't want to build an empire, because that was the mistake with Media Africa. We became part of that consortium because we thought this is a way for us to get big fast. And I discovered in the process how much I hated trying to get big fast, and the kind of demands that were made by big brothers, you could say, that didn't understand what we were doing. Worldwide Works, I decided, was always going to be small in terms of number of people, in terms of infrastructure, but we would be very big in terms of impact. And we would do that by using the internet and leveraging the tools that the internet made possible. And that was one of the great promises of the internet from the start, that it allowed anyone to level the playing fields. And that was how it became possible for small companies to become billion-dollar businesses very quickly, because of all the tools they could leverage. I didn't have those ambitions. I just wanted to be able to enjoy what I do. And I loved the kind of research I was doing, the kind of writing I was doing. And I wanted to keep loving it. So I didn't want to build an empire. And today, Worldwide Works is still what they call a boutique research house. We have a tight team. I do have a staff, and we do have strategic partnerships that help us to be able to conduct research of any size. Do a project where we interview 20 people, we can do a project where we interview 6,000 people. because of the strategic alliances that we have. And then we do the data analysis in-house, strategic analysis in-house and the like. But the actual field work we do with outside partners. And the result is that, for example, in the course of this year, we had 4 massive projects going at the same time with some of the world's biggest companies involved as either sponsors or as the clients of the research. That was only possible because of the kind of infrastructure we had created, the kind of structures that we had created, and the ability to leverage this thing called the internet that was per se 24 years ago. That's a long-winded way of saying we really utilized all the tools that the internet made possible to create a cool, fun, and successful little business that punches far above its weight.
It does. I've actually seen some of those websites. I remember the 90s. That's when I started my first business. Because I loved the internet. I thought it was amazing. Obviously, there were all those problems where you had dial-up that took forever. It wasn't easy. It was basically the Wild West. You could do anything in that space. So it has been a really opener. And I suppose this leads me to the question, when COVID hit, everybody went online. Basically, people worked online. They did heaps of things online. So how did you end up in the AI space? So you've mentioned things like, for instance, you wanted to make people more aware of the technology back in the 90s and onwards. But for AI, what was your motivation there and how did that come about?
It was always important for me to be at the cutting edge of technology, because that's what excited me. That's what I was passionate about. And I wanted to share that with people. And I wanted to, in a way, prepare people for what was coming next. And next was a very big word for us. Whatever was coming next, we wanted to be prepared for it. I wanted to be prepared. And I wanted to make sure that my readers were prepared. And we as a company wanted to make sure our clients were prepared. So we were always looking for cutting edge research opportunities. So cloud computing was a good example of that, because although the cloud, as we know today, was in effect invented by Amazon Web Services in the early 2000s, just as an aside, that original cloud platform was built in Cape Town, because the person who came up with the architecture for Amazon's cloud services was a Cape Townian by the name of Chris Pinkham. He was one of the founders of one of the first internet service providers in South Africa. He went on to work for Amazon in Seattle, and he proposed, along with a colleague, an architecture for a cloud computing service that would serve Amazon's online needs far more effectively. And when Amazon looked at this, they realized this could actually be a bigger service than just for Amazon itself. And Chris was given the go-ahead to build a team and build Amazon Web Services. And he proposed Cape Town as the location for the developer center, because it was a great place to live. It's a great place to work. They could attract people to work for them. And also there was a great talent pool from which to draw. And he was very familiar with that talent pool, because Cape Town has always been a startup hub. The result is that the AWS cloud, the original platform or foundation for it, was built in Cape Town. But it took that was about 2006 that it was launched. It took another 6 years before it fully became a widely accepted business option to host your data and your applications in the cloud. And interestingly, the first advert on public television for cloud computing was from Microsoft, and that was in 2012. So 2012 was really the beginning of the commercial cloud. And in 2013, we actually conducted our first research project on cloud computing in Africa. With the sponsorship of Cisco, we conducted that project in 2013 across South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, which were the only countries where there was any kind of use of the cloud at that stage, or significant use of the cloud. But that was a seminal study, and we still do that project every second year, sometimes every year, depending on the interest of the sponsors. So that also enabled us to really understand what the cloud is making possible in general. But the point there is that we were always looking for the cutting edge of research. And I began writing about AI in the mid-2010s. And in 2016, persuaded a company called CISPRO to let us conduct research on AI uptake, among other forms of technology uptake. So we did a broad project for them, but a key part of it was looking at the fourth industrial revolution and the technologies that make up, or supposedly made up, the fourth industrial technology, one of which was artificial intelligence. And to us, that was a key outcome of that research, because it was the first time ever anyone on this continent had looked at AI uptake and intended AI uptake. And it gave us one of the first key insights into AI in business on the continent. And that was that a small number of companies were using it, a large number of companies intended to use it. So that was when we did the research in 2016, published in 2017. We showed less than 10% were using it, but more than a third wanted to use it. The following year, when we repeated the research, we asked those questions again, and we discovered that instead of the third, or more than a third, using it, it had gone up to something like 14%. So still close to 1 in 10, as opposed to now 3 or 4 in 10. And then we asked, why are you not using these technologies? And we gave a number of options. And one of those options was cost, and another one was skills. And we discovered that it was too expensive for most companies to use AI, and the skills didn't exist. And those go hand in hand, because if the skills don't exist, then it becomes very expensive to employ or train people in those skills. In effect, what we found then in 2017 and 2018 was that that enterprise was not ready for AI because of the lack of skills. However, there were outliers, there were companies using it, and that became a huge area of interest to me. So I was looking at, for example, Naked Insurance, launched in 2018 with the first AI-based insurance product in South Africa. 2017, end of 2017, I attended the Amazon Web Services annual conference in Las Vegas called reInvent. And with my eye out for AI, I was gobsmacked by the fact that AI dominated that particular conference. AI for the enterprise, though, not for consumers. But they unveiled 22 AI products during that conference. And during the main keynote, the then CEO of AWS, Andy Jassy, who's now the CEO of Amazon.com, announced 5 major new AI tools that really, in my book, I describe it as having the audience gasping. In fact, in my column in the Sunday Times that week, I wrote that line, that it was a glimpse of the future that had the audience gasping. Bear in mind, that's end of 2017, way before generative AI. So,
were there any particular ones that stood out for you?
yes, the big one was Comprehend, Amazon Comprehend, which was an AI tool that could analyze and summarize text. So that was obviously the precursor to ChatGPT and other generative AI products. There was one called Recognition with a K, which was an AI tool that could recognize faces in videos, live or recorded video. And that instantly became a tool that law enforcement started using to monitor public areas, airports, key installations, to spot wanted people or people behaving suspiciously. The AI could also tell, based on training prompts, whether people were behaving out of sync with the way they were supposed to, or behaving strangely or threateningly or suspiciously. But there were so many false positives in that it actually was a public relations disaster for a lot of police forces. And it was a great lesson in how AI can go wrong. But it was one of the tools that really stood out at that event. But Comprehend was the big one, and Translate was the other, for AI automatically translating text. And there were 2 others. There was one called SageMaker, which allows companies to be able to build machine learning tools without having too many skills on board. That one very quickly started being used by the financial services industry in South Africa for building fraud detection tools. All of those were very significant. Those 5 stood out, as I said, at the time, and I write about it in my book as well, and I describe the 5 tools. But what I said at the time, which was such a fortuitous statement because it makes me sound clever, I said that these tools all sound like science fiction, but in 5 years' time, they'll be mainstream. And I wrote those words on the 30th of November 2017. On the 30th of November 2022, ChatGPT was launched, and suddenly those tools were mainstream. So it was just luck that I chose the number 5. But it's a very happy memory and a happy kind of luck that I felt that I had stumbled upon at the time. So that's another way of saying that I was ready for all of this when it happened, because it had been building for so long. I've been writing about it for so long. Generative AI now had a name, but it was something that I'd been writing about in 2017. And I was delighted to see the impact it made and the extent to which it drove a new revolution in the use of AI, but also the extent to which it suddenly made AI mainstream for the public and for the enterprise world. This one last full stop to put on that sequence of events is that earlier this year, we conducted the first study on the uptake of generative AI among South African enterprises, and that was commissioned by Dell and Intel. And we found that in large enterprises, 97% either had started using generative AI or were planning to use generative AI. That's almost unanimous. Compare that to that study back in 2017, when less than 10% were actually using it.
Do you think people have the skills? Because you mentioned that was one of the challenges.
Depends on the skills you're talking about, but the massive difference is in 2017, the skills were too expensive to hire. Today, they're becoming, on the one hand, a commodity, and on the other hand, unnecessary, because to use generative AI, you don't need the skills. If you want to build generative AI, yes, of course. And those are probably some of the most valuable people in the world in terms of what they can earn. But to actually use it, no, you don't need the skills. You don't need any skills to use AI. You just need to understand the use cases to which you can put it. And that's the difference. That's why it's gone from 10% to potentially 100%.
Yeah. Is there any tool you particularly like yourself, like that you use regularly?
One I've been using for quite a few years is called Otter, OTER.ai.
Yeah.
And that's a fantastic tool, as obviously for transcribing interviews and your own talking and conferences and meetings. So the big selling point for it today is to transcribe meetings and summarize them and give you action points from those meetings. For me, it solved one of the biggest problems of my journalistic career, which was when I interviewed someone significant and I recorded that interview, I would need to transcribe it before I could actually use it. And the transcription would take 5 times longer than the interview itself. So 1 hour interview would take, if I was lucky, 5 hours to transcribe. So it became not just burdensome, but also put me off actually conducting those kind of interviews. And I was very reluctant to do interviews. Otter came along and suddenly it could do it for me instantly. I would do the interview using Otter as the recording instrument and walk away from the interview. By the time I get to my office or to a space where I can work, I already had a transcription. Absolutely transformative. And I've also used it to dictate when I have an idea that I can't write down fast enough. I use it for meetings as well. And when I get interviewed like this, I'll use Otter to record it so that I actually have a transcription of what I said. Because sometimes it's useful to actually have a record of what one said previously, and you can actually adapt that to your own writing.
Do you use it in conjunction with things like ChatGPT? For instance, you pop in the transcript and you ask it to give you some key things that was spoken.
Very much so. I'll pop the transcript into ChatGPT. I use the paid version, GPT-4, or Claude, Anthropic Claude, which is actually one of the best on the market. And I asked them to, either to summarize for me or to pull out the key points or to find any mention that related to a specific topic that I want to write about. So let's interview someone for my Sunday Times column, which is a very tight column. It's about 650 words, and I can do an interview lasting an hour that'll generate 10,000 words. But because I also give it context in the column and my own comments and my own insights, it brings it down to maybe 300 words that I could actually use from the interview at most. So I then will ask GPT-4 or Claude to give me the most important comments that were made in the interview about this topic. Let's say accessibility. So that's a topic I'm looking at quite closely at the moment. So I'll do an interview this week with the chief. I'm not sure what they call her, but she's chief of accessibility at Netflix. And that's going to be a very interesting one with a lot of interesting comments. But which of those are most directly relevant to a column on a subtopic of accessibility? So I'll then ask Claude or Anthropic to pull those out for me. And if I'm not happy with it, I'll then go through the interview again. But at least I can use those quotes then within my column, and knowing that I didn't have to spend hours rereading.
Yeah. And they're now offering GPT-4 Omni free, which is amazing, which is great. Personally, my favorite one, if I have to use one for kind of research, is probably Perplexity, because
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah.
Everyone is raving about Perplexity.
It's really great because it gives you sources, whereas with the other ones, you don't really get sources. Now, they are bringing them in, obviously, especially Anthropic with Claude 3. They're bringing that in now, which is fantastic. But I thought, what a great idea. It's Wikipedia, but I wouldn't say better, but Wikipedia for specific things. Yeah, it was pretty good. Okay, so I have two more questions for you. Your book. Any key things that you want to share with the audience, maybe like in 2 minutes, that will maybe surprise them? And where do we go to find it? And then I have one question that I'm going to keep in my pocket for now.
I think the significant insight that does surprise and delight people comes from the range of case studies I give in the book. Bear in mind, the case studies come from actually attending events or conferences where the tools are announced and where they present case studies of how the tools can or will be used, but also visiting actual people or institutions that are using AI in novel ways, or participating in the novel use of AI. So you get a kind of underground sense of how AI is being used. But I looked for as many examples as I could find that would support the narrative of the book within the continent of Africa. So it shows how Africa has tremendously innovative uses of AI to demonstrate to the world. And the conclusion I then draw, and which I push throughout the book, is that when you look at innovation in Silicon Valley, it tends to be driven by opportunity. The great example is Uber. Uber was an opportunity that a bunch of techies saw in San Francisco. It wasn't exactly something that was needed as much as something that's good. Wow, here's a gap in the market, let's go for it. In Africa and across Africa, when you see major innovations, it's because they're trying to meet a need. So in Silicon Valley, innovation is driven by opportunity. In Africa, innovation is driven by need. That's the fundamental difference. And it also helps to guide startups in where they should focus their energies.
Okay. So my last question for you is, if you could go back in time, seems you like the sci-fi stuff, and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
I would go back just 10 years to when I was doing regular interviews about Bitcoin, and I was asked, should people invest in Bitcoin? And I would always say, if you have disposable income that you are willing to spend in a casino, rather spend it on Bitcoin. And if I had taken my own advice, I would be significantly wealthier today.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Arthur. It's been fantastic. If people want to get hold of you, what is the best way to do that? Is this through LinkedIn, through your website? What are the best ways?
LinkedIn is my preferred way of making contact with people. It's an incredibly well-organized environment, and you also trust people more on LinkedIn than on any other platform. They can follow me on Twitter. I might not follow them back. And also, I might not believe they're real on Twitter. I get followed by so many obvious bots on Twitter. And it's not a trustworthy environment. LinkedIn is very trustworthy, so I like that. You can read my columns on Gadget. Even my Sunday Times writing eventually also runs on Gadget magazine, gadget.co.za. The Hitchhiker's Guide to AI is available in all good bookshops in South Africa, but also online. If you go to the Pan Macmillan website, then you can find links to where you can buy it online. They don't sell it directly, but they provide links to the online available, particularly in the United States. You can printed copy in the United States for $22, and then it depends what your shipment costs are. Outside the United States, you can do the same, but shipping costs are exceptionally high, so I don't recommend it. It is available on Kindle, on Amazon, and it's also available as an ebook via the Pan Macmillan South Africa website. So that's what I would recommend. But if you want to contact me, look for me on LinkedIn. My name is Arthur Goldstuck.
Awesome. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing your story and how you got to this. We will also include the links to those sites. So thanks so much, Arthur. It's been amazing. Good luck with all the technology. I'm with you on that. I get as excited about all the cool new stuff that we can play with that if you think, as you mentioned in the very beginning, how hard it was to get the internet going, this is something completely different. This has been adapted in months versus years. It's a very exciting space. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Deirdre. It was great fun. Thank you.
Thank you.